I started to pray for myself. Having not gone to a particularly religious family, I had to, in a sense, learn how to pray in a personal way. Quite difficult in some ways to describe what it's like to feel called to the priesthood. There was never kind of like some clear, and I had this big revelation about where God was calling me. To your ministry, helping people to encounter Christ. Your ministry should, as a priest, be a bridge to Jesus Christ. The priest was able to give him free gifts, free sacraments, the gift of Holy Communion, the gift of the anointing of the sick, and confession, reconciliation as well. We got called out one day to go and see somebody who was dying. This old man, you know, he was not in the best of care homes in the world. He didn't really have any family who were able to visit him. He was, as I say, dying, and he had cancer. He looked like he was in a lot of pain and suffering. You know, and from a worldly perspective, this poor man really had nothing. He was just a sick old man from the perspective of the world who was just waiting to die. But from God's perspective, it could not have been more different. From God's perspective, he was so blessed, because after this man had received those free gifts, I know it might sound really cheesy or corny, as we say in England, but he just kept saying under his breath, "It's so beautiful." And he was one of the happiest, the most joyful people on this planet, even though from a worldly perspective, he might have been one of the lowest. From that divine perspective, he was one of the most privileged, and he recognized that within himself. And those gifts came to him through the priesthood. And it really made me reflect, you know, if it wasn't for the fact that that priest that had been there, he would have died without being able to receive those gifts, without being able to experience that joy at the end of his life, and those gifts that actually help a person on their, you know, journey of being saved by the Lord. Hello, my name is Father Gough, and I'm a priest of the Archdiocese of Birmingham in England. I've been a priest now for just over 3 years. I come from a town called Walsall in the middle of England. And as a child, I was from a single-parent family. My dad left when I was quite young, probably 3 or 4, and really the circumstances of my parents' relationship was pretty bad, pretty difficult, a lot of violence and other things that were part of that. And so growing up, I was pleased to actually just have my mum growing up, and part of a wider family, brothers and sisters, aunties and uncles, one of 4 brothers and sisters. And generally speaking, my childhood was quite a happy one overall. Went to a Catholic school and grew up as part of a Catholic family, but not one that was especially religious. So it was religious in the sense that I was baptized as a child, but we certainly didn't pray at home. We didn't necessarily think much about missing Mass, perhaps even more often than not. So there was a sense of maybe Catholic identity growing up that was fairly strong, but not one of faith being at the heart of life. At the age of about 10, as I was getting ready to move on from primary school to secondary school, there was a huge disruption in my life when my mum ended up going to prison for a number of years. And so I ended up having to go and live with my younger brother, with my aunties and my grandmother, who very kindly looked after me for those 6 years when my mum was in prison. It was actually really at a similar time to this that the about that age of 10, 11, that I started to pray for myself. Having not gone to a particularly religious family, being in part of a particularly religious family, I had to, in a sense, learn how to pray in a personal way, in a way that wasn't just from going to church or from saying prayers when I was at school, at the end of the school day or something, but in a more personal way. And so at about that time, perhaps the disruption of what was going on in my private family life played its part, played its influence. But that was when I first started to learn to pray and to start to try to pray each and every day. At first, it wasn't necessarily much. It was just sort of, doing the sign of the cross and the Our Father. But really, at that point, as a young child, that was really when my personal relationship with God started to grow. And it was as my personal relationship with God started to grow as a young boy at that point, that it wasn't long afterwards really that I started to first feel the call towards being a priest. The idea of priesthood kind of became present to me more or less as soon as I started to pray, started to develop that relationship with God. And in many ways then that journey just kind of continued. That journey of prayer, that journey of growing in a relationship with God, spending more time each day in prayer, reading more about the faith and the lives of the saints. As I got older and old enough to be able to go to church on my own, I'd not just go on Sundays, but try to go to Mass on other days of the week and Eucharistic adoration, making use of the sacrament of reconciliation and so on. In many ways, it was in tandem with that. My relationship with God grew, and this sense of calling to the priesthood also grew kind of concurrently with that. It's quite difficult in some ways to describe what it's like to feel called, at least from my own personal experience, to describe what it's like to feel called to the priesthood. There was never kind of like some blindingly obvious moment when it all became clear and I had this big revelation about where God was calling me. It was more of in some sense, a force of attraction or a force of desire that was there in my heart. And what's perhaps kind of strange about it as well is that it wasn't always that I actually wanted to be a priest. It's not always that I've really desired it in the sense of personally wanted it, but more in some sense felt drawn towards the priesthood, or it's always been present there on my mind, even at times when I've tried to reject that or push that to the side or say to the Lord, maybe one day if, in maybe 20 years' time or something like that. But it was always there. And over the course of many, many years, as I say, starting at a fairly young age, maybe 11 or 12, that kind of age, and then at various times taking that more seriously or less seriously. In some sense, though, the really helpful thing for me, because of that lack of clarity, that a real sense of definitive answer of whether or not God was calling me to be a priest, it was only really when I made touch with the church that it was really helpful for me for that greater clarity to come about. So when I was 19, I decided then to make contact with the vocations director. The vocations director is a priest that every diocese will have who's in charge of helping those young men who are thinking about the priesthood to discern their vocation, both for them to discern their vocation themselves personally, but also has the responsibility of, in a sense, the church is discerning you as well. Do we want to accept you as a priest for this archdiocese? And so it's kind of a two-way process of discernment between you and also the church. The seminary is the college where you go to train to be a priest. It's a place that prayer, of further discernment of your vocation, a place of study, and many other things to help prepare men who are on that journey towards the priesthood. And it's generally quite a long period of study. For me, it was 7 years in total. The first of those years was spent at a seminary in Spain on what was called the propedeutic year, and then the final 6 years was spent in England at Oscott College, St Mary's College, Oscott. That year in Spain was really wonderful. It's a propedeutic year really helps to, the idea is that the church wants to prepare you for seminary itself. In many ways, the culture and the world that we're living in nowadays doesn't lend itself towards preparing people for seminary in a way that perhaps was there in the past when people tended to grow up in, maybe both stronger families, maybe families where there's more of a faith background, also where the entire kind of like Christian, the whole community was Christian and helped people to just be formed in those basic ways of Christian community life. Time that you spend in seminary has kind of four major, what you could call strands or dimensions of your formation, your kind of growth towards becoming a priest. Of course, the most important of them is the spiritual formation, which is your growing in your relationship with God, participating in daily mass and daily prayer in the life of the seminary, seeing a vocations director regularly whilst you're actually in the seminary to help you on that spiritual journey and growing in your relationship with God. That's obviously at the heart of those years in the seminary. You also have, perhaps most famously, what people might associate most with seminary is the academic formation, which is spent in classrooms learning about philosophy and theology and the scriptures and so on and so forth, and sitting in those classes and actually learning those various subjects. And then another side of formation, it's kind of hard to put your finger on, but it's often called human formation. And human formation is really about you growing as a person, as a human being, essentially. That's why it's called human formation. Just growing in terms of your self-awareness, growing in terms of maybe anything that might be an obstacle in your human nature, in your human personality, that might be an obstacle to your ministry helping people to encounter Christ. Your ministry should, as a priest, be a bridge to Jesus Christ, and your humanity should be part of that bridge to Jesus Christ. Finally is what's called pastoral formation. So pastoral formation is growing in terms of the actual ministry that you're going to be taking part in. So that could include all sorts of different things, even in the context of your time in the seminary. So it'll be for a month at a time, you'll go and spend in a parish with a priest and just live in a sense, the life of a parish priest for a time. But also on a weekly basis, when you're actually at the seminary, you might be expected to go out for the afternoon, say, for example, to a school or to a hospital or to a prison, to a care home. They're all different placements that I was assigned to as part of that pastoral formation. That was something I really, really loved. And I think it was the thing that really helped me to go from that sense of uncertainty, as I said before, if I had to put a number on it, maybe 60, 70% certainty about the priesthood, even though I felt sure about joining seminary, I wasn't sure about being a priest at the end of it, to really feeling not just that God might be calling me to be a priest, but also really importantly that feeling confident that I really wanted to be a priest. And that was largely as a result of the pastoral formation. I really loved it, really loved the life of ministry. They may become the body and blood of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, at whose command we celebrate his mystery. So it was in the year 2020 that I was actually ordained as a priest. As you'll be fully aware, I'm sure, that was quite a turbulent year with the COVID-19 global pandemic. It was quite disruptive in some ways. The ordination date was delayed and there was very limited numbers of people that were able to come to the ordination when it did actually happen, and so on and so forth. However, I can truly say it was one of the most joyful days of my life. It was really such a privilege to be able to be ordained by the Archbishop of Birmingham in the cathedral there. None of the things in life that are really worthwhile come easy. They all require us to make sacrifices, and the priesthood is no different. I've now been a priest for just over 3 years, and it's been a real joy and a privilege in so many ways, and challenging in many, many other ways, and obviously does require sacrifices. But that joy has ultimately come to me through the privilege of being able to serve God's people, which I really, really love and appreciate every day. Particularly being able to celebrate the sacraments, to be able to offer the Holy Mass and to stand at the altar. The privilege of being able to hear confessions and bring God's forgiveness to people. Something I'm really passionate about is working with young people, and so one of the great joys over these last 3 years of being a priest has been being chaplain to the secondary schools and been able to work with the youth groups of my parishes that I've worked in, and just been able to walk with young people and help them to grow in their own relationship with God as well. And just something that I'm personally very passionate about, not necessarily just as a priest, but as a person, is the pro-life cause. That really goes back to the difficult circumstances of my own conception and the difficult relationship between my mom and my dad in those early years. And really, she would have been the kind of person that people would have encouraged, to have an abortion and so on. And for me, I always am grateful that my mom has always been pro-life, and so never contemplated that option for me. So it's always something that I'm passionate about in the context of my ministry, is being able to help to create pro-life communities and individuals wherever I'm going, and making a contribution in that way as well. There's a really well-known quote by St. Augustine of Hippo that really resonates with me, particularly as I reflect on the priesthood. And he said, "What I am for you terrifies me, what I am with you consoles me. For you, I am a bishop, with you, I am a Christian. The former is a duty, the latter a grace, the former a danger, and the latter salvation." And how true that is, not just simply of being a bishop, obviously I'm not and don't think I ever will be a bishop, but how true that is too of the priesthood. As priests, fully aware of what an important role and ministry it is that you're taking part of, in some ways bringing Christ and his graces to the people of God. But it is a duty. It is one that in and of itself doesn't make you any holier. And it just speaks to me of the importance of recognizing that as a priest, we need to be people of prayer, people who make use of and go to the sacraments and to the mercy of God, for example, in the sacrament of reconciliation, and along with the rest of the people of God, not to see ourselves as above, but rather as servants of God's holy people, to be people who, just as much as anybody else, need the word of God, who need prayer, who need God's mercy, his forgiveness, especially as that's found in the sacraments.
Lord and giver of life, raise men filled with your power and with great missionary zeal, so that all who dwell in darkness may come to live in the light of Christ. Amen. "10 years of sharing the peace of Christ." Shalom World, God's own channel.